And just so you know, the show is 57 minutes.
Okay.
There'll be a break roughly at 1:30. You know, it depends on how the conversation goes, but they're going to do a little pop-up chat, and the sound engineer just came on air, and so he'll put up there, they'll count down from 4 minutes down to 30 seconds.
Okay.
We have wiggle room with that first break, so if we go past 30 seconds, not a big deal.
Got it.
But at the end of the show, it's a hard stop once they do 4, 3, 2, 1, 30 seconds, because then they roll into the next show.
Got it.
Hey, Chris, how we doing, my friend?
Great, sir. How are you?
Doing fantastic, thank you. I see we have Dean as a guest today. How you doing, Dean?
I'm doing great.
Good, good. Do you by chance have a external mic or a headset or anything like that?
No, how is this audio not good?
It's just a little muffled, but it'll be all right.
I hear you fine.
I could probably ask my guys to get a mic in here. You want to ask them to plug one in?
I mean, we don't have one available right now.
I think you're okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll be all right. I just want to see what we had to work with.
I'll get a little closer. How's this?
Yep, great.
Much better. And just sent you the test message, Chris. You got that?
Got it. Let me pop it up. Dean, are you able to see that?
No.
Chat. If you click the chat window.
Oh, yep, I saw test at the bottom.
Yep.
And one break today?
Yes, sir. Yep. Next week's when I throw you the curveball.
What's that?
I said next week's when I throw you the curveball with partial live, partial pre-record.
Ah, yes, yes. Yeah, just make sure you let your engineer know when you record with them, whether that's me or otherwise.
Okay, will do.
All right, got about 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, and Dean, you know, I know I gave you sort of the run of show here, but you get whatever message you want out there.
So again, as I said, I'm happy to talk all day about FIRST. I'm happy to talk all day about the technologies we're developing for growing replacement human organs. I'm happy to talk about the fact that we just delivered a few new iBOTs to Medal of Honor recipients and people that have given their limbs for this country. So I appreciate that you're giving me flexibility, but it would help me if you guide the conversation and don't be bashful.
Yep,
you can
absolutely.
shut me up, turn me off, steer me in any direction you'd like.
Got it. I appreciate that. The only time I'll do that is with the last 30 seconds.
Well, but I mean, if I'm going too deeply into something, or if I skip over something you care about, just, you know, it's your show.
Okay, we'll flow pretty easily. I appreciate that.
And I'm drinking a little tea.
There you go.
Exactly where in Connecticut are you?
Stanford. So about
Okay.
35, 40 miles.
Yeah, you're close to New York.
Yeah.
You're not too far from Yale.
Nope. About 45 minutes. On a good day.
Yeah.
So they'll do a pre-recorded intro, and then they'll say, you know, and here's Chris Meek, and then we'll be live. They'll hear some music.
Okay.
Not your first rodeo, though. And your painting over your shoulder there of Einstein's one of my favorite of all time. I love that one.
My father did that.
That's fantastic. I didn't know that.
And that's our mill building. He did it, you know, because I've been renovating these 170-year-old mills. That's the one.
Yep.
That picture and this building are the same. That's the front door of
20
this
seconds.
building.
Thank you.
And he just put Einstein on it.
Ten seconds. All right, Chris, you ready to rock and roll?
Let's do it.
All right, have a great show.
Thank you.
The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Empowerment Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericaempowerment.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
There are few things that make people successful. Taking a step forward to change their lives is one successful trait, but it takes some time to get there. How do you move forward to greet the success that awaits you? Welcome to Next Steps Forward with host Chris Meek. Each week, Chris brings on another guest who has successfully taken the next steps forward. Now, here is Chris Meek.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's edition of Next Steps Forward. I'm your host, Chris Meek. It's great to have you with us again, and it's an incredible honor to have inventor and philanthropist Dean Kamen with us for the entire podcast today. Dean, welcome to Next Steps Forward for what I'm sure is going to be an enlightening and entertaining program.
It's always good to be talking with you, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk about something as important as taking the next step forward.
No, I know how busy you are, and so truly appreciate you taking the time out. For those who are unfamiliar with Dean Kamen is one of the most recognized and sought-after innovators of our time. He's made it his life's work to invent technology that improves the lives of others. Dean is the founder and president of DEKA Research and Development Corporation. You've heard of, and maybe even used, some of the technologies he has developed. Among his 1,000 plus US and international patents are the HomeChoice portable dialysis machine, a robotic arm funded by the federal government's Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, a new and improved Stirling engine, the Slingshot water purifier, the iBOT mobility system, and the Segway Human Transporter. Dean Kamen has received many awards for his ingenuity and dedication, including the National Medal of Technology in 2000, which was presented by President Clinton in recognition for inventions that have advanced medical care worldwide, and the Lemelson-MIT Prize in 2002. He's been a member of the National Academy of Engineering since 1997 and was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2005. He is a fellow of the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering and many other national and international engineering organizations. Dean, congratulations on all you've accomplished.
Thank you.
You know, those credentials alone account for Dean's iconic status in the science and technology communities and beyond. But he's also a passionate advocate for finding enjoyment in science and sharing the gratification of innovation with the next generation. Dean is a leading voice inspiring future innovators and encouraging others to understand and listen to science. Among his proudest accomplishments is founding FIRST, which stands for Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology, and FIRST Global, two organizations dedicated to motivating the next generation to understand, use, and enjoy science and technology. Now, Dean, when we spoke last week, I know you want to focus a lot of our time and discussion on FIRST Robotics, and I promise we'll do that. But I think we really need to have to start with your work. You know, what got you into science and inventing? And did you have a specific mentor? Was there a particular experience, or some combination of both?
I wish I could tell you I had some well-defined, vast plan as a kid. In fact, I think part of the problem I had with school, and to this day, is history always shows a neat, straight line in the process of developing anything, individuals, organizations, cultures. In reality, I don't think it's really that way with anybody, and certainly with me. Life was a chaotic set of events, and I would seize opportunities as they came along. I would be affected by the serendipity of various events. But as I look back over my life, including right back to when I was a student, I never did have a plan. I would just always be passionate about something I was doing. I would seize an opportunity and move forward. As a few basic examples, while I was still in high school, my older brother, who was a well-organized, detailed, maybe he did have better plans than I did, MD, PhD candidate, ended up as a professor of medicine, Yale University, a brilliant guy, and had already started his research as an undergrad in dealing with pediatric cancers. I mean, babies, neonates with terrible diseases like cancer. And he was coming up with ways to treat them, but many of these babies weighed only a few pounds, and there wasn't equipment to deliver drugs to a baby that small. You can't put an IV bottle on a baby. He'd come home on the weekends, frustrated that he couldn't do his work. I'd get down in my parents' basement and build him devices that would allow him to deliver precision amounts over precision schedules by taking tiny syringes, building them into a little device, and delivered it to him. That wasn't a business plan. That was a brother that needed help to save babies that desperately needed help. Now, it turned out he was very proud of these little boxes, And by the way, to prove it was not a business, I can assure you brothers don't pay you anything. But he would show it to his professors at Harvard, where he was doing a guest residency at a very prestigious medical school, at Yale, and wherever he went. And the docs at these places, and some of them world-renowned researchers and clinicians, would see this little battery-operated thing that I built for him to put in an isolette with a baby with a rare disease. These docs would say, wait a minute, that little battery-operated delivery system, an adult could put that in his or her pocket and walk around getting medication all day long. And where is an application for that back 40 years ago? How about, unlike the rare diseases of pediatric cancer, the most common need for chronic delivery of a drug is diabetes and insulin. Well, a few of those docs called me, asked if I could modify it to be optimized for instance, insulin. And it literally created an industry. I had to eventually move out of my parents' basement, start a company which was called Auto Syringe that would chronically deliver precise microdoses of insulin. And then from there, as more and more people saw these delivery systems I was making, I started building different kinds and more of them, and eventually started building dialysis equipment. But none of that was some big strategic plan. It was me reacting to somebody that had a need and trying to figure out what technology that was currently available and would soon be practical, that I could do a systems integration, put it together, solve a real problem. And in the end, as a byproduct of doing that, it turns out you could make a profit, which could ensure your independence and allow me to keep going and grow a business. And that's what I've been doing for now 4 decades.
With 1,000 plus patents to your name, well, obviously we could talk about them for days. But I'm especially intrigued with your earliest, or maybe one of your earliest projects. You're talking about while you were still a college undergraduate, you invented the first wearable infusion pump that rapidly gained acceptance. You talked about diverse medical specialties as oncology, neonatology, endocrinology. How does an undergrad decide to invent the first wearable infusion pump and then actually go and do it?
So as I said, I was building them as kind of one-off little devices to help my brother in his research. But as he started showing it to the docs at the various medical school he was at, they would call me and ask if I could modify it. And essentially, they didn't realize it, but they were essentially doing all the hardest work of an inventor. They were very carefully articulating a very specific problem statement. And I long ago realized that half of good inventing is making sure you have properly defined a problem that really needs to be solved. And so I would listen to these docs and realize that what they needed was something small, reliable, programmable for whether, as you just said, whether it was for insulin or chemotherapy or any other kind of medical need they had. I would listen carefully to what they wanted. I would go back and I would build what I thought was an engineering solution to their clinical need. I would deliver it to them, and I'd ask a very subtle secret question like, is this what you need? And if their answer was yes, but, I would listen to the but and modify it. If they said yes, this is perfect, I would go back and start building more of them. The answer to the question, again, how did I turn that into a business? I had roommates, I had students that I was getting to know both in high school. I set up a little assembly line in my parents' basement for my brother's units. And when I moved on to college, I started working with other students at the college, and then rented some space and actually hired some of the professors that were at that school because I was having trouble trying to go to class as well as run my business. So I would hire the professors for nights and weekends to both help me get the products developed, but in the process, I was learning in the real world how to do the electrical engineering, the mechanical engineering, the systems engineering. And as each project got done, I would have a broader group of experiences. I'd have a larger group of people that I was working with, either as consultants or finally as employees. And to this day, we do it that way. I have about 800 professional people up here now at DEKA, but we still pretty much do the same thing. We don't have a big marketing department or a sales department. We talk to the people that have a need. We figure out whether there's technologies out there now that could be a huge answer to that need that's better than the currently available answers. And if the answer is, yeah, we really understand the need, and yes, there's better technologies these days than what's being deployed, we bring all the technical resources together to build that new solution and deliver it to the people that need it.
You know, it's very rare to find, you know, somebody like yourself and your colleagues with such tremendous business and technological acumen. And so you've obviously built a phenomenal franchise. And so it's just incredible to hear, you know, how things started, you know, in your basement, kind of like an Apple type idea, to now being world renowned and having phenomenal assets that you've developed. You talked briefly earlier about your first company, Auto Syringe Incorporated, which was to manufacture and market those pumps. Then
Correct.
working with lean diabetes researchers, you pioneered the design and the adoption of the first portable insulin pump, which quickly proved it could much more effectively control patients' blood glucose levels. At age 30, you sold Auto Syringe to Baxter Healthcare Corporation. You know, a lot of people might have just called it a career at that point. You know, what is it about Inventors, or you in particular, that keeps you going to new frontiers rather than saying, you know, I've accomplished more than most people in a lifetime. I'm good. That's it for me.
Well, in the first place, even if I had decided, yeah, I did enough work, that's it for me, what I would want to do the next day is essentially follow a passion or a hobby, which is indistinguishably different than what I'd been doing until then. I love understanding physics, mathematics, the principles of engineering. Then I love figuring out how to apply those laws of physics and those rules of engineering to actually make things. But if you're going to make things, which is fun to do anyway, I'd rather make things that can help people than be some kind of a toy or consumer product that's going to end up in a landfill soon. I'd rather work on building stuff that I know in the end could really help people live a better life. So yes, you're right. At the age of about 30, when I sold that company, I didn't sell it because I was trying to retire. I sold it because as it grew, I went from a few people doing the design and the development and talking to the docs about what their needs are. It went from that few people to now I need more people to manufacture, and then more and more people to manufacture, and then worry about supply chain, and then worry about going to the medical shows and worrying about all the other stuff that you need to do when you're running a business. It's hard work to run a business, and it takes a lot of focus and skill and discipline. I'm not really good at focus and discipline. And I decided that, you know what, there are big companies out there that are really good at that. They have global reach. They can more effectively get to the people that need it because they can spread the cost of marketing and sales across a much broader portfolio of their products. What maybe those big companies aren't as good at is thinking out of the box, coming up with the next thing. After all, if they're focused on supplying the thing they're making now and it's meeting a need and they're making money, you can understand why they wouldn't be focusing on what's the next thing, which might make that one less relevant. So I decided, having sold that company, that's one of the reasons I sold it, was why don't I just stay focused on what we tend to enjoy doing, that we're good at, which is trying to create the next thing. And once I get it to a place where it's scalable and it can work, then I'll partner with these big companies, because while I'm very, I think, good and keep getting more focused on front-end development, we never got really good at the end, which is do all that support. And these big companies are particularly good at that. They're very disciplined. They're very process-driven. So I did sell the company, but it never crossed my mind it was because I was going to quit or retire. It was by selling the company, it gave me a lot of resources that I could focus on building what, in fact, he once visited here, and Bill Gates, at the end of a day, walking around here, and my home said, Dean, the only way I can describe this place is it's a cross between a museum of science and technology and Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. And what my life is about is looking at various kinds of technologies, many of which are evolving in real time as we sit here, and figuring out how to uniquely apply them to meet the kinds of needs that are particularly important to people with medical issues. You know, everybody knows the Segway, and they think I set out one day to build this, quote, human transporter, the Segway. In fact, for 4 or 5 years before anybody saw a Segway, I was working on yet another one of our medical problems, namely the wheelchair has been around for a couple of 100 years, but the wheelchair is a pretty pathetic alternative when you no longer can stand up and you no longer can walk. I mean, in a wheelchair, you can't even have an eye-level conversation with your peers, your husband, your wife, colleagues. In a wheelchair, you can't even go up a curb, never mind a flight of stairs. So I realized way back then that the world of solid state gyroscopes and accelerometers and high performance servo motors and high energy density batteries were all coming into being at the same time. And with those gyros, I could essentially do what your inner ear does to allow you to balance, and all the rest of the technologies that were becoming more and more available and reliable. For the same reason, you could build drones and you could build all sorts of autonomous devices. I said, why don't we build a device that can emulate human balance, that can put a human on 2 little points on 2 wheels that are where your feet would be. And because it's balancing, you could let somebody stand 6 feet high. And when it gets to a curb or a stair, it can, what we call, cluster up and down those stairs. And it would give dignity and access and independence to the whole disabled community, with the first real improvement over the wheelchair in 200 years. Well, we worked for years on figuring out how to do that. And it was a medical project, like most of everything else we do. But once we got it to where we knew it could work, we said, you know what, to get the volume of the components high enough in the manufacturing environment to drive the cost of building these things down, because fortunately there aren't millions of people that would need an iBOT, this device for the disabled community. But I said millions of people would want to stand on a platform that can simulate human balance. Basically, we said, take everything we had developed and learned about balance and servos and gyros and accelerometers, let's put them in a platform. But since it's for an able-bodied person, we don't need the seat, we don't need the cluster. We'll just build a device that a person can essentially stand on and move around, i.e. the Segway, in a pedestrian environment. But because it was, let's say, more visually appealing than an iBOT to a much broader group of people, even though we started it 4 or 5 years after the iBOT, because it's not a class 3 medical device, it's a simple subset of the iBOT, I instantly became known as the Segway guy, even though everything else we do is medical. And even the Segway came from its medical, it descended from the iBOT. And I'm happy to tell you, we're now making iBOTs, the next generation. We delivered a few of them to, particularly, I'm proud of this, to a number of Medal of Honor recipients and a number of veterans that literally gave their legs for this country. And we're now giving them back their independence with our new iBOT. Well, that was a long answer to your question. I'll shut up.
Oh, no, that's perfect. And as someone who's had the privilege of visiting your facility, I think Bill Gates' description is spot on. And also, when I was with you, I did try out the iBOT. And for our listeners and viewers, I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, and was in the iBOT, and I couldn't push Dean over and the device. And so it truly is a phenomenal piece of equipment. And I do know how proud you are in terms of the work you're doing with the veterans, the Medal of Honor recipients, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But I have a quick question for our listeners and our viewers to watch on YouTube. We talked briefly before the show about the painting over your shoulder with Einstein on the Segway. Just want to tell folks briefly about that.
So my dad is an artist. Before I was born, he grew up in New York and became a illustrator for the comic book industry. Shock, horror, suspense, Tales from the Crypt, all the EC comics. But he then married my mom, who decided my father could move on from being an illustrator of comic books to an illustrator at a different corporate level. And he remained for the rest of his life an independent artist and illustrator. And by the time he reached, probably 65 or so, I had moved out of New York up to New Hampshire. I moved my parents up here after I had the resources to do that. My mom retired from teaching, but stayed on keeping the books and being the accountant from my little company, DEKA, and my dad made all the artwork for all of our rooms, pure artwork, and he did all the graphics for all of our products. And so I started developing these old mills in Manchester. The one I'm sitting in right now, you can see the brick behind me. Well, the front of this building has a stair tower. This building was built in the 1874. It was a building on this river. I'm looking out the river now at the Merrimack River, and it was one of the many buildings, big brick mill buildings that operated the largest single industrial complex in the country at that time, making textiles. Anyway, after the Great Depression, they all ended up empty. I moved up here, started renovating them. I moved DEKA into this one and started spreading it out. I now have about 1 million square feet of these mills all along this river. But my dad, who had a little office here and would do work for all of our projects, when we launched the Segway, and my father knows I've got portraits of Einstein all over this building and all over my house. He likes doing portraits. I like hanging Einstein portraits. He has such a unique face. My father took a model of the Segway. He put it in a piece of artwork he did with the front stair tower of this building. That in that artwork, that's the 1874 building. That's the building I'm sitting in right now. But he made that picture of Einstein on a Segway cruising around my mill yard. And it became something that so many people at Segway loved. We ended up making a poster out of it, and it almost became the symbol in the early days of the whole Segway project.
I love it. I love it. So we've talked about the iBOT, the Segway, your medical devices, a lot of different things, I understand, but the major focus in the medical industry. Where does your inspiration come from, and how do you capture it in a way that once you're able to advance the next step in that creativity process?
So I think inspiration is, it's what drives almost everybody I know that does something extraordinary. It's funny, I think, and again, the business school people always are looking for some surefire pathway to success, or they want to teach people how to succeed. Everybody says they want to succeed, and they always want to make it easy and fast and low risk. And they therefore try to give you some skill set, a technical skill or a human skill, I don't know. But I've now watched a couple of generations grow up. I've watched a lot of successful people. And I will tell you, there's no commonality except for one among them all that succeed at doing something really new and big and different. And it's not how fundamentally smart they are. It's not how well educated they are. It's not their family background. The only characteristic that I see consistent among all these people is that they're inspired to do something, and they have such passion because of that inspiration that they're willing to risk. They're willing to fall down. They're willing to pick themselves up and keep trying. They just never give up. And the only explanation I have for why other people, and frankly why I don't give up on something, is because I'm inspired that if this could only work, it could have a huge impact on people. It's important to do. And it's important enough that it is worth risking your time and resources, and most of all, your ego and your reputation. Most people are unwilling to fail. Most people are so risk averse, they only make incremental changes in what they do every day to avoid risk. And most people are successful at avoiding that risk, and they move through life getting marginally better and marginally stronger every day. But the same consequence of taking small enough steps that you don't fail has the unintended consequence that you'll probably never make the big leap that you might have made if you were inspired to just let go and have at it.
Now, you've talked about collaborating on projects earlier in the show, and just now you mentioned inspiration and passion. Are those the two key elements you look at when you're thinking about somebody to collaborate with? Or are there other traits that depend on the project you're working on?
So I typically don't depend on our partners for the inspiration. I think they depend on us for that. I like to find those big partners, as I said before, that have the things we don't have that you really need to bring things to scale. Big organizations are really good at scaling things up and leveraging scale. I think that's very important once you know what it is you're trying to scale. But again, a big organization has all sorts of systems in place to prevent failure. And most of them are pretty successful, which is why you see most big organizations run in a very methodical way like clockwork. But again, an unintended consequence of having that great process in place that prevents them from a surprise failure also prevents them from a surprise big breakthrough. So I think we don't look for people to give us that out-of-the-box thinking, that big breakthrough idea. We like to go to the big guys and say, supposing we could do this, supposing I could demonstrate that this might happen. Now, truth be told, I'll probably fail 9 times before I get in the 10th one, a way to demonstrate that we've lowered the risk, we've learned how to do it. This thing is now ready for prime time, it's ready to scale up. And then we hand it over to the big guys. And hopefully their expertise will allow us to take something that might have ended up as a really neat science fair project and turn it into something that can, help the lives of millions of people, whether it's people with diabetes or people that need dialysis or people that need mobility or people that need clean water, or in the case of FIRST, kids that need to have their focus and their passion turned on at an early age so that they can themselves develop the skill sets to have exciting careers.
This is Next Steps Forward. We're with inventor and philanthropist Dean Kamen. I'm Chris Meek, and we'll be right back after this break. All right, we are back with Dean Kamen. Dean is the inventor, among many things, of the Segway, the iBOT, many medical devices, but I think what he's most proud of is being a philanthropist. His goal is really to inspire kids to develop the same love for science and technology that he possesses. Dean, I promised earlier in the show that we talk about FIRST. I'm a man of my word, so let's talk about FIRST, which, as I mentioned before, is short for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. Can you tell our listeners when, why, and how it got started?
So first of all, Chris, thank you, giving me the opportunity to spread the word about FIRST. So hopefully more parents, more teachers, more mentors, more sponsors, and ultimately more kids is a great opportunity. But I have to fix one thing. You said I'm a philanthropist. And whether I'm a philanthropist in some way related to other things or not, I don't know. But I would differentiate FIRST from being a philanthropy to it's about the best investment a society can make. And I started FIRST entirely with enlightened self-interest. I want to retire in a country that has a standard of living that I was accustomed to as I grew up. I want to be in an environment where young people are smart, enthusiastic, positive, and you can only be optimistic if you believe that you're going to have a good life relative to what's around you. Everybody in every generation before us has always said their kids should do better than they did, and it was pretty much true. But all of a sudden, at least as I was growing up, we started to see cracks. We started to see the disparity, the haves and the have-nots. And there were all sorts of people that were coming up with all sorts of excuses or explanations or patches or band-aids for how to fix it. And it always seemed clear to me, you can't fix a problem like that by putting a patch over it. I think industry, even back 30 some odd years ago when I started FIRST, was starting to recognize there would not be enough world-class scientists and engineers to keep these companies going and growing and being competitive in a global marketplace where the rest of the world is focused, typically like laser beams, on getting kids really smart and really capable. Our government people recognized it was a risk to our security, our fundamental security. I think every serious person I knew when I started first was already aware that this huge looming problem existed, that fewer and fewer kids, particularly women and minorities, were even thinking about science and engineering and technology as a career. And even back then, it was at least clear to some of us that the future was going to eliminate most of the jobs that could easily be done by, let's say, machinery, robots, automation, and that the exciting careers would be more exciting, but they'd also require a higher level of skill. So again, as I said before, I think a well-defined problem is half solved. And I think 30 some odd years ago, this problem not only wasn't well-defined, I think it was misdiagnosed. And even to this day, a lot of people think we have an education crisis because we have so few kids, particularly women and minorities, studying math and science and going into engineering. I said 35 years ago, or more now, we don't have an education crisis. We have a culture crisis. My mom back then was a school teacher, and she's still a teacher. I talked to her this morning, and she reminds me every day she's a teacher, and I better listen. But I think everybody I know, even all those people back then and today that claim we have an education crisis, will always follow by saying, but they had great teachers and they learned a lot. Well, then what's the real story? Well, the whole inspiration, we talked about that too, the whole inspiration behind FIRST, in fact, the word inspiration is the first word of it really, for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. Notice the word education is not in the name of this organization. 35 years ago, I said, if we have a culture problem, not an education problem, if it's not that we don't have great schools and great teachers, but we don't have kids that are desperate to get a great education, again, particularly women and minorities, because our culture steers them away from that. In many ways, it's an unintended consequence of what happened to our culture. But I said, let's assume the problem is, it's not the supply of education. It's not the lack of supply. It's the lack of demand. If we have a country where kids, by the time they're 5, 6, 7 years old, they can tell you the name of all sorts of superheroes from the NBA, the NFL. They can tell you about all sorts of role models and superstars of the music industry, of Hollywood. But you ask any of them, can you tell me the name of a famous living scientist or engineer? Can you tell me the name of a young, enthusiastic inventor that you see that you think, I can be like that person? There are none. They're not on the newsstand covers. They're not on TV. They're not in the shows. So let's say 35 years ago, I said, all right, if it's a demand problem or lack of it and not a supply problem, let's figure out how to get these young kids as focused on developing that muscle hanging between their ears as all the others that they have. And again, I'll remind you that while I'm told I'm an inventor, and I hear a lot of people think inventors start every new project with a clean piece of paper and invent from scratch, whole cloth. That's crazy. People that try to do that are going to fail. Yes, I made the Segway. I didn't invent the wheel, the motor, the battery, the microprocessor, the solid state gyro. I just systems integrated things that worked to create something that didn't exist until I put them together. That's a shorter path. It's a lower risk path to get to a real solution. Well, once I realized that we have a culture problem, it's a lack of demand problem, not a supply problem. I didn't invent a way to create demand. I did what all good inventors do. I started with what we knew worked. Well, kids love sports. Kids love entertainment. We have an entire culture that's built around making superheroes for these kids. And these kids will put their heart and their soul and their passion, and they are inspired to become better at bouncing that ball. They'll practice 4 hours a day to get on that varsity team. Well, that'll make them better at that skill. But they don't see the varsity math or physics or engineering environment. They don't see anything, particularly, again, I'll keep hammering away at that, women and minorities don't see even a pathway to how exciting and how successful their life and their career can be if they develop the skill sets that are going to be necessary to be engineers and scientists. So 35 years ago, I said, all I'm going to do is take what I know works, sports and entertainment, and I'm going to build into it the content being the skill sets of engineering, of mathematics, of science. And I set out to create an organization. The singular goal would be to inspire all kids to see how accessible, how fun it is to understand the laws of physics and to have the power of mathematics and the language of mathematics to define problems and then solve them with all sorts of cool technology. But as I started developing FIRST, by the way, I realized how effective we have been as a culture, unintentionally, at stamping out any chance that kids will see science and engineering as exciting. I mean, look at it this way. You go into the average school and there's a teacher that during the day, it's their job to put a red mark on everything you got wrong, whether it was the wrong answer in math or the wrong spelling. It's their job. They're required to be judgmental and to tell you what's wrong and to give you a C or a D. That very same teacher at 3:30 turns his or her hat around and becomes the coach. And after school, they're nurturing. And if you strike and you miss it, oh, don't worry, it was a lucky punch. Don't worry, we'll try again. And you don't get quizzes and tests and finals. You get trophies and letters and recognition. And you bring the mascots and the school band and the cheerleaders, and everybody gets together to celebrate. In fact, the whole way we as a culture justified the enormous expense in schools, on school budgets, of having sports, we justify it all by explaining it's really important that kids learn teamwork. Well, then why, when you do it in the classroom, do you call it cheating? And so the more I thought about it, the more I was convinced if we could just take the entire, quote, playbook of sports, no quizzes, no tests, make it aspirational, make it after school, make it every day for hours if you want, not once a week on Thursday morning between phonics and spelling. You're not going to learn to love algebra or trigonometry or physics that way in a classroom where you get a little bit of it once in a while and then you get tested on it. No, let's put all of those skill sets to real practical use after school. It's like nobody wants to go to gym and do calisthenics for 45 minutes, but they'll play any sport hour after school. So I built an entire model around saying everything that works about sports, make a short, intense season, 6 or 8 weeks, like each season in school. Let's start it out by giving people the playing field and a set of rules. Let's end it with double elimination tournaments and prizes and awards and recognition. And let's make it a total team building exercise, but we'll make it, and I wasn't going to compete with science fairs. I wanted to compete for the hearts and minds of kids with the Super Bowl and the World Series. But I said, the only difference between my sport and all the other sports is my sport will be the only one where every kid on every team can turn pro. The average kid that spends hour after hour as they're growing up chasing whatever sport they happen to like is unlikely to ever make a career out of it. There aren't that many jobs in the NBA, and you better plan on being 7 feet tall. There aren't that many jobs at the NFL, and you better plan on being 250 pounds. But there are millions of jobs out there right now for people that can write code or do engineering. And the number of new opportunities for jobs and careers and creating whole new industries is accelerating at an unbelievable pace. But all those kids that don't develop the skill sets and the passion and the confidence to be part of those in the future are going to have no shot at it. And that bus is picking up speed faster and faster and faster. And this current generation of kids is either going to be on that bus or under it. And they've got to develop an appreciation for science and technology. And if they do, they're going to have exciting lives and careers. Anyway, so about 35 years ago, when I was looking at how to create a sport that would compete for the hearts and minds of all these kids, I realized I had one fundamental problem I'd have to overcome. And that is you need superstars. Otherwise, in our free culture, kids are not going to do it. And again, a simple proof by example would be in this country, we get kids, we have very good football teams and basketball teams and baseball teams, you name it, all because there's high school varsity, there's college sports, there's professional, there's the NFL, and there's the MLB, and there's the NBA. So we have kids that aspire to do this, develop the skill set. But in this country, we don't have a lot of kids that play cricket. In fact, if the Department of Education decided we have a critical cricket shortage, the way we have an education crisis, there'd probably be a 20-year federally funded study on getting rid of the cricket shortage. By the time they come up with the cricket curriculum, they'd probably be working on the remedial cricket curriculum, and they would be dealing with the supply side of a problem. When in reality, in the culture of America, the business of America is business. If we really wanted millions of kids to be good at cricket, the way to do it is to get a few superstars of that sport, put them on all the networks that show great sports, and as soon as kids saw people being watched by millions of fans, making millions of dollars, but being really good at something, those kids would be inspired to work hard to be good at that. So I realized if I make a sport out of science and tech, but I don't have superstars of science and tech to put in front of these kids, it would be another version of the science fair. You know, the folding table in the basement of the middle school with the plastic paramecium on it that mom and dad have to go on Saturday morning to watch with the kids. Then they all go home and turn on the Super Bowl. Well, which do you think these kids and their parents are gonna, you know? So I said, all right, where can I find scientists, engineers that are every bit as excited by what they do every day, as proud of what they've accomplished every day as the superstars of other sports? Well, they're at the federal labs, they're at NASA, they're at Google, they're at Apple, they're at all the big companies that just reek of tech, but they're also at the Johnson & Johnsons and all the other companies that I do business with that I know are desperate for engineers, that are full of all sorts of people that spend every one of their waking hours at work trying to solve critical problems. So I went to those CEOs and said, look, all of you giant companies are desperate for smart, well-educated people. You want a bigger pipeline, you want more people. But you know what? Look at what your sales and marketing people spend your money on. You're all the biggest supporters. Look at the ads that you buy at enormous fees for the Super Bowl and the World Series. And you're big supporters, proud supporters of the International Olympics. It's all over your products. Well, if you high-tech companies spend all your time telling kids what you're so super proud of is your sponsorship of all sorts of sports, where do you expect these kids to put their time and attention? And the same thing, I went to the big university presidents that I knew at the time and said, you know, the average kid sees universities, institutions of higher learning in our country as the Cornhuskers, the Razorbacks, they think of your universities as farm teams to professional sports. It's one thing that the sports team should be appealing to these kids, telling them how important sports is, but should our universities be appealing that way? And should our big corporations be using their sponsorship dollars to make superheroes out of entertainers and sports figures? In a free country where you get the best of what you celebrate, if all we celebrate are those things, where are these young kids supposed to become inspired to become really smart, particularly in things as frustrating to learn as complex science and mathematics? So we've got to change the way we look at this stuff. Well, at the end of that few meetings I had 35 years ago, I got about 25 companies, the ones I just mentioned and a few others, to say, all right, team, we will find within our company some young, enthusiastic scientists, engineers, inventors, and we'll lend them to you to be the after-school coaches, really the mentors, really not the coaches, but the mentors and the superstars that will be visual proof to kids that not all scientists are middle-aged white males with frizzy hair and a German accent. You know, it's off in the corner out to destroy the world until they get punched out by the young star. I mean, our culture is so anti-science and technology in subtle ways yet we do, the butt of the cheap joke is always those scientific nerds are always bad guys. And among kids even if a young girl in the movie or TV show is really, really smart, she's always depicted as not the attractive one, not the social one. You know, it's great to make that the butt of a cheap joke, but it has consequences. And so I said to these companies, find me some of you young scientists and engineers. Hopefully some will be Latino, some will be African American. Let's break every stereotype you got so we can appeal to all the kids in this country while they're still young enough that they can develop the passion, to develop the skills, to become the people they need to be, the people that your companies need, the people that this country needs. So again, jumping back then, about 25 companies said, all right, we'll lend you a few people, but they're not going to become the teachers. You know, hey, you know, LeBron James doesn't teach phys ed. And if you couldn't afford him to do that, and there aren't enough of them to go around to the 80,000 schools, but he's way more effective at creating a lot of people with skill sets at basketball than he could ever be if he was a teacher. He's there to inspire these kids. So I said to these companies, just lend us those guys, let them show up at these schools and work with the teachers. The teachers will be the coaches, the same way the schools have the coaches for all the sports teams, but the only reason they get kids to join is because those kids see the professional athletes. So we'll let you guys show up with superstars of tech, and we'll let the teachers be the coaches that help corral the energy of those kids once they're motivated and inspired to do it. So I created the kit. I made 25 kits. I gave them to 25 companies in January, I think, of 1990 or somewhere early 90s, and told them, you're going to appear in 6 weeks at a high school gym. Bring your kids, bring your teacher, bring the coaches, bring the mentors, bring your corporate leaders, and we're going to have a double elimination tournament where your little robots, which that first year could fit in a shoebox, we're going to put them in a double elimination tournament on a Saturday morning, and we'll have fun. At the end of the day, every one of those 20 some odd teams had a great time. The kids learned a lot. The teachers were just blown away by the passion that erupted among these kids. The corporate folks were super enthusiastic that they were able to participate in changing these kids' attitudes so quickly. At the end of that day, I said to all the corporate types, hey, if I make the kit twice as big, not 10 pounds, I'll give you 20 pounds of junk next year to go build a bigger robot on a bigger field. Will you all come back? 100% of them said, we'll be back. And I said, bring your friends. Well, they're all big companies. They had, you know, connections. So the next year we had about 50 teams. The third January, it's now official, every January, we give out the kit. We always change the game. We make it bigger. We give them more cool stuff in the kits. By the third year, we had 100, then 200, then 500. By about the 6th or 7th year, we started doing regionals at the end of the 6 weeks so that mid-sized and small companies could participate without having to put people in airplanes and fly them to Manchester and putting them in hotels. Again, it's like sports. Kids can watch the Super Bowl or the World Series, but then they can play Little League in their own town. So some of my biggest sponsors started saying, all right, we'll do New Jersey, we'll do, you know, Illinois, we'll do Texas. Well, by our 10th year, we had every single weekend in March Madness, had at least 2 regionals. We had, I think, about 15 regionals. And then a championship moved to the Georgia Dome. Well, we kept growing and growing. And as of last year, here's some numbers. Last year, every weekend in March, we had something like 35 or 40 cities. In fact, the 5 weeks in March, I don't know if you can see this, but this was my schedule for last year's events. And we had 180 regionals in March. We had
That's incredible.
80,000 schools involved, 200,000 volunteer mentors from big and small companies, 200 universities sponsoring teams, giving away $80 million last year in scholarships. The scale of this thing, and it's almost entirely run still by volunteers. The scale of it is enormous. The impact it has on kids is phenomenal. And to me, it proved a few things. One is, as we started this conversation, inspiration is the most important aspect of what it takes for a person to excel at something. you have to be willing to work really hard, to stay focused, to run the risk that your robot fell apart, it caught fire, that God knows what happens to these robots. But these kids have learned to deal with failure. They've learned the same things they learn when they go out and play a sport. But I think the most important things is inspiration is the most critical aspect of getting somebody's attention. B, the other thing I learned is while everybody can complain and find the blame game about why so many, again, women and minorities aren't involved in science and tech, they're unwilling to understand it's a culture problem, not an education problem. There's no simple solution. But the most important thing about FIRST to me is it proved that if you create the right opportunity to bring together the parents, the teachers, the corporate sponsors, the volunteer mentors, and of course the kids, if you create the right environment for people to do the right thing, even though every one of those groups puts more into FIRST than they could possibly think they could get out of it in one season, by the end of the season, they've all worked like maniacs, and every one of them has transitioned to saying, I got more out of this than anybody could put into it. We have mentors now that they're kids. We've been at this more than 30 years. Dean, I got involved in 1995 when my kids were in high school. Now they've graduated. They've gone on to study engineering in many cases. They've got their own teams. Now I'm competing with them because I stayed with the school they were in long after they graduated. We have engineers that say, I've retired now from NASA or United Technologies or Boeing, but it just gives me more time. So I work more with FIRST. And whether they're the teachers, the parents, the mentors, once they've been involved with FIRST,
Dean,
they
I'm sorry.
never leave.
We're out of time. Thank you for that. Dean Kamen, thanks so much for being with us today. Thank you for sharing FIRST Robotics. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek, and keep taking your next steps forward.